Good morning. My name is Eric van Veenendaal, or Erik van Veenendaal in Dutch, or you can only call me Eric and I will listen as well. So I'm going to talk about risk-based testing and risk-based testing in agile projects. Okay. My presentation is going to be very much a down-to-earth presentation. It's not like a keynote with a lot of vision, like, oh, this is the way to go, we're going to think about it. I'm just giving you how we're approaching it today in my projects or how I'm seeing it being approached. Okay. Risk-based testing in agile projects. I will start in a minute. The first few slides is just making sure we all understand what risk-based testing is, so we are all on the same wavelength. What's the risk, things like that. Then I'm going to look a little bit about how did we do it, or how could we have done it in our traditional projects. And how can we transfer that knowledge to our agile environments? Okay, that's going to be the next hour or so, or hour and 20 minutes, whatever it takes. Now we've got more device, I think. It works. This is me. Not so interesting. This is more interesting. Yeah, I can go again. Whoa, yeah. I'm good, I think. I'm not good, I think. Well, I'm good, but that's not good, yeah. Yeah? Good. No? Yeah? Good? Okay. Okay, that's what I usually do, sound checks, I guess. Anyway, risk-based testing. If you think about it, risk-based testing, and also in agile projects, in any projects, first of all, why? This is also something I use to convince people to start doing it. This is about the challenges we have as testers. Agile doesn't make it easier for us. It's not a silver bullet. Not in Agile you have all the time, all of a sudden, all the time in the world. At least I don't. If you think about it, and I've been in testing for many years, probably even around 20 years now, it didn't get easier. The systems we're making today, compared to systems many years ago, are much bigger, much more complex. They interface with the rest of the world. You think about it, I mean, I just wrote a survey from Philips that the amount of software, so lines of code, in consumer products, DVD players, TV sets, whatever you can think of, is doubling currently every 2 years. So every 2 years, twice as much software in a TV set or a DVD player or whatever they're building. That's huge. On the other hand, you can say, well, if software development gets twice as good every 2 years, who cares? But that's not the case. People like Les Hatton measuring defect density over the years, and he's saying that it's going down only very slowly. So if we're not good at testing, we'll release more and more defects to the field. And the question, of course, is, we all know we can't test everything. Where should we focus on testing? How can we be effective at testing? What are the risks of this new system? That's what this is talking about. That's why risk-based testing is important. To do effective testing, and also because I assume in your projects you don't have all the time available, scarce resources, so it's about efficiency. So risk-based testing is basically the answer in trying to be more effective, which we need to be, with the challenges we have, and also looking at efficiency, to make sure everything we do has a value. That's a key word I think today, probably. Business value or value. Testing challenges. By the way, and this is a poster was hanging on the wall on a project I was involved in. It says, here you can actually read it. Normally you have to explain what it means, but I guess in Hungary, parol, niemals aufgeben, but everyone knows what it means, right? And the frog, by the way, were the testers. Okay? Okay, when we enter when we enter risk-based testing, the first question is, what's the risk? Now, there's an ICTP glossary that says something about risk. I could read it if you like. A factor that could result in a future negative consequence, usually expressed as impact and likelihood. Well, I have no idea what that means. What I mean, what a risk is, to me at least, is something. If it occurs, you're less happy. That's very easy. Everyone understands that. If this happens, oh no, I can't sleep for a week. It's a big risk, right? Someone's like, small risk. So if it happens, you are less happy. Everyone understands that. That's a risk. In life, in IT, in testing. And of course, we need these fancy definitions as well, but who cares? If it happens. And of course, we see already there's two elements. It's about the impact. So can't we sleep for one day or a whole week? And likelihood. What are the chances it will happen? Now, Thomas was already mentioning responsibility of testers. And this is one which I always say in the beginning. We, as testers, I'm assuming most of you are testers, do not own the system. Most testers, and I've come across many testers in my life, have quality in their heart. I will not press too hard because otherwise it starts beeping again, I guess. But you have quality here. That's why you become a tester. You want to have big products, nice products. And sometimes that means if someone releases something and you think, oh, it's not ready, I can't. That's okay. That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to identify the risks, probably to mitigate a few, to report on them, and to make sure your stakeholders know what the product quality is today and tomorrow. And based on that, they will decide whether to release or not. That's a difference than being the owner or feeling like the owner. No, we can't release because... No, that's not your role. It sounds obvious now in this room, but I'm pretty sure back home in your projects, you'll do differently. Because many testers have that. No, I can't release that. Okay. So what's a risk? Okay. So basically, when you think about it, testing to me is all about risk management. That's probably the fun of testing. Because every project is different. In every project you enter, you have scarce resources. You have only like 1 month or 1 week for each small sprint, or you have only one test environment, or you have whatever. There is always limitations, which I think is the fun of testing. You don't start whining, I can't test this because no, that's the fun. The fun is you only have said 3 weeks, or 4 weeks, or 1 week. And within this full week, your job, your challenge is to do the best testing possible. If you don't like that, do something else. That's just who we are, right? That's the challenge, that's the fun. I've been in testing for, as I said already, for 20 years, and probably after 20 years it's still fun. Why? Because every time again it's challenging, every time it's different. It's balancing, it's communicating, it's trying to get a little bit more resources sometimes. Sometimes you get those. Testing is risk management. It's trying to get what I call is called the most feasible, so the best possible coverage, without talking about what coverage actually means. It says here, it's the right level and type of coverage on the right time, so hopefully important features tested first. And this is true whether you are in a waterfall model, in an agile environment, or wherever, okay? So this is, as I said already, the starting up, just to make sure we all understand what is risk-based testing, what is risk, what are we talking about? So understanding this, and this is a comic which you may have seen before, it's called Testing Ted. We also know that defects are social creatures, right? You know defects, you know them? They're all together, oh, this is a nice place to sit, right? Defects are not like there's one there, and there's one there, and there's one there, and they're randomly distributed. No, they like to sit together. So there are places in the system where you'll find more defects than others. We all know that as testers, right? Lessons learned from the past. And one of the things in risk-based testing is that up front, you analyze your system and you think, where are these defects being hiding? They likely sit around interfaces sometimes, or very complex algorithms, or you know a few of these things, I guess. So risk-based testing is about trying to identify in which part of the systems are most defects. So the question is, or the comment is here, if only we knew. So by doing risk-based testing, by doing a good risk assessment, you hopefully can focus on those parts that are actually really important. The last introduction slide. Looking at risk testing, you have a number of phases, and I will come back later on in the techniques I'm presenting. Identification, analysis, mitigation, and monitoring and report. We first identify the risks, so what are things that can happen that make me not sleep, basically? Or where do I think these defects, these social creatures are hiding? Identification. Then we analyze them. By the way, notice I'm saying then we analyze them. In many projects I've been involved in, they're trying to do the same thing in one step. So someone says, this is a risk. And someone else says, no, it's not. That actually means that person is able, in 2 seconds, to do a full analysis. You can't. First, build a list. And in this list, everything still is okay. These are all the possible risks. Then, in a structured way, you go to the next step. Are they really risks? How important are they? Are they big risks? What's the chances? Remember, if you go wrong here, you can do great testing afterwards, but the wrong testing. Wow, I did all these continuous partitioning test cases. Yes, I've learned cause-effect graphing. Wow, look at it. Orthogonal arrays. Wow. Just in the wrong spots. Too bad. So this is very, very important. Focus your testing. Know where to focus, how to focus. And of course, after the identification analysis, we go into mitigation. We build test cases or do other things. So hopefully we take away some of these risks. And also part of risk-based testing is we report back in the same language we ask people information from. So risk-based reporting if you want. Okay? 4 steps. Just take a little. Now the method I'm going to explain or I'm going to talk about is you can agree with me, you can disagree with me, and I'm fine. I don't care. This is not a method which has been developed, I would say, in an office. It's been developed very much bottom up over the years. So we're doing things in projects, and we're learning from it, and we're learning, doing something. And these are companies that actually we did something with. Some you may recognize, because they're also familiar in Hungary. Some you may not recognize, that's just the way it is, I guess. By the way, this is, I don't know if I can mention this one now anymore. You know what the KNVB is? No idea, right? No. The KNVB is actually the Dutch Soccer Association. Okay? I think there was a game between Holland and Hungary not too long ago. Okay. But even they have an information system, right? And some testing. But okay, that's another story, I guess. So it's very much a bottom-up developed practical. And if you think I want to do it differently, feel free. It's not a theoretical perfect system, but it worked for them. And I think that's important to share experiences. Okay, step 1. And I'm first going to do it, I would say, how is it done a little bit more in traditional environments. So I'm not going to focus, first of all, on Agile. I'm going to explain the rules, how it works, how it should work, and then we'll make the shift to, and how can we transfer this knowledge to the Agile environment. Okay? But we have even less resources, less time. Risk identification. What was a risk? A risk was, if this happens, that was our definition, right? You're less happy. How's the project start? Well, hopefully, we'll talk about this later on more today, but hopefully there are requirements somewhere. In Agile context, they're called user stories, or backlog items, whatever you have, or term you'd use. Suppose there's a requirement, user story, and the system doesn't deliver the requirement, so you don't have it at the end, or it's not delivered correctly. That'll make you less happy, right? Right? So that means, basically, if you think about that, every requirement is a risk. Or every user story is a risk, because it can fail, it cannot be delivered, and it will make you less happy. So risk identification, to us, to me, is very, very simple. We just go to the requirements, we just go to the user story and say, let's take a list, and these are our risks. So basically you split up the test basis, we call that, the basis for testing, the requirements basis into functional items, and make a list. You can even put a type to it if it's a functional risk or a reliability requirement or whatever, you make a list. Very simple. Very down to earth. We're not using fancy methods here. It's good enough. And of course, if there are no requirements, and I think Lloyd's going to talk about it today, haven't seen his presentation yet, but I'm assuming he'll talk about that because that's what the title is. You can do some brainstorming. It's an alternative. But usually there is at least some documentation. And some documentation is good enough to build a list. Now, this is interesting. And this is simple. The second step is a lot harder. Once you've got the list of requirements or user stories, okay, what's the risk analysis? What's the impact? Ooh, what's the impact? And depending who you ask, there's always someone who says, it's really big, it's very important, right? And what's the likelihood? Well, I have no idea, but and some methods say 0.43. I have no idea where they got that from. However, you all have a lot of experience already in testing, I'm assuming that. I think most of you have. And if I ask the question, what's the likelihood, then you get a very subjective answer. However, we can try to make it more objective. Say, what are the reasons, this is important, right? What are the reasons why sometimes we find more defects somewhere? And if we do this in the workshop, we then start raising hands and people say, well, because there are many interfaces. Okay, that's a good reason, yeah. Because it's being developed by new developers, inexperienced people. No offense, that's a good reason. Because we have done some outsourcing with it. That's your experiences. So basically what you can actually find is reasons, I call them factors, that explain why there's a likelihood of defects. Why you expect to find more defects. And of course, these factors, these reasons, you can talk about much more objective, right? You can actually say, are there interfaces here involved? Yes or no, or how many? Is it complexity? Yes or no, and how much complexity? And the same thing with the first factor, what's the impact? There are also factors, reasons, that determine whether there's an impact. What happens? Sometimes you say, well, in some organizations, as long as the defect stays inside the company, we're okay. But external visibility and getting into, I don't know what it's called, the Budapest Post, whatever, that's what we really worry about. Or sometimes, if you are in the medical industry, I did a lot of medical systems, if there's a safety-related feature, that's what we really worry about. So what you basically have in trying to answer these two questions in a more objective way is we have factors. Factors we use to answer these questions. And I'll give you some examples. This is just a list from practice. It's not the theoretical complete list that we've built. Complexity. If it's more complex, more chance of defects. If it's new developed, likelihood of defects. If there's more interfacing means communication between people, usually. That's always not our strongest point. Defects. It's my lessons learned, right? Sometimes it gets so big, people lose overview. New technology, always fun for testers, right? More defects. What else is on the list? Working in different locations. I just did a project working in Singapore, Southampton, Hamburg, Eindhoven. That's always fun, right? More defects. Testing is fun, basically. Inexperience, new people coming in. All again, fun. So all these things help you to identify, this is what it's about, where is the highest likelihood of defects. I'll explain a little bit later how that works. The same for impact. What you don't want to ask, is this feature important? Because you only get yes, 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 it's always important. But what are the reasons? Why is it important? As I said already, external visibility. Sometimes it's important because it's used all the time by many, many people. The frequency of use. Sometimes it's important because if this fails, we have a financial problem, financial damage. Or I would say even worse in some industries, we have a safety issue. Sometimes it's important because it's strongly related to the primary process of the organization. Or it's a selling item, a new product. Large marketing campaign we're doing from TomTom, and this is a new feature. Well, probably a good idea to test it as well then. So there are factors for, I would say, likelihood and factors for impact that help you to answer the question, what's the likelihood, what's the impact, in a much more objective way. Okay. How does the process work? And I've got 2 slides on this only, and usually we take a day for it. So if you feel you've missed something, that's correct. Okay. First step, how does it work, is stakeholder analysis. And this is more important than most people think it is. A statement I always make is, a forgotten stakeholder means a forgotten risk. So if you forget to involve someone in this whole process, quite likely you've also missed a few risks. And missing a few risks means you will not test those, or not test those as thorough as you expect them to be, with all due consequences. So risk analysis. And by risk analysis, we get up to it could be a lead developer, it could be, a business owner, it could be an end user, and we start thinking, I'll go back to the previous slide briefly, from which of these aspects, of these factors, does he or she understand? So basically I'm going to assign, if you want, factors to these people. A lead developer, for instance, could probably tell us something like complexity expected, or what's new development, or where the interfaces are. I wouldn't have to ask that question to the end user. However, the end user could tell us probably about how often is it used, right? And a business manager would probably be able to tell us about financial damage, and even how much he worries about external visibility sometimes. So when we assign the scores, we end up with, to put it simple, with Excel sheets. Excel sheets which, on one hand, you have the risk items, list of requirements, user stories we're going to test. And on one hand, the other hand, on the axis, we have the factors that he or she was assigned to. And we say, there's more to it, but again, I'm simplifying it. Let's say on a scale of 1 to 5, how important that is. Okay? So let's assume this is our manager, and we're asking the question, okay, please score on a scale from 1 to 5 the business importance. First item, first user requirement, first user story. That's a very important user story. Business needs it. It's important to the business. Related to the primary process. On a scale of 1 to 5, I think it has to be a 5. Okay, that sounds good. Okay, dear business manager, the next one. This is a very important requirement. It's a very important user story. We really need it. It has to be tested very thoroughly. On a scale of 1 to 5, I'd say 5. Okay. The third one. That's a very important requirement, right? It's a very important user story. You must test it to the maximum of your ability. Perhaps a little bit lower, but scale 1 to 5, I would say a 4. That's as low as I can go. Really, I'll give you some slack here. Number 4. That's a very important requirement. You've been there, right? You know this manager. And again, of course, he gets a 5 and he gets another 4. This doesn't help us. Because what basically it says is, well, I'm not making any choices, because that's safe, not making choices, and test everything. And we already know as testers, sorry sir, we can't test everything. You gotta help us make choices. So in this method, technique, we have a rule that says they shall make choices. That means if we're doing it in a column, this is a column, we want an even distribution. So we want 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s. If you use Excel sheets, it's very simple because you get a program they can actually only put in, and in the end they get an error message, you've used too many 5s or too many 4s. Very simple. So instead of doing, now I've pressed another button which I have no idea what I've done. Okay, that works. Usability is good. Okay. Anyway, so this doesn't work. This does. And this will be a good score. Because of the rule, they have to make choices. I must tell you already up front, if we start using this, that is also a bit of education for people. That it feels strange. It feels, I'm giving a 1. It doesn't feel very good, does it? Sometimes we use little stickers. You know, you just, sometimes you have to play a little bit. In the sense that you put a big board on here, you put the risk items over here, and you say, well, here have you got 2 red stickers. 2 red for you, Lloyd, and that's all. And the red stickers, of course, are a 5. But that means they can go to the board and say, oh, over here and over there. 5's gone. You get your 2 orange stickers, which is a 4. So there are, I would say, mechanisms how to get people to make choices. But they have to make choices. And very important, we, as testers, cannot make the choices for them. Because we're not responsible for the system. They are. They have to tell us what's important. I know nothing, right? Then, usually we have a consensus meeting. So suppose that multiple people fill in the checklists and we get the Excel sheets back or tables back or the scores back. We have a meeting with the stakeholders and say, hey, I've got some differences. We have to talk about that. And a 5 and a 4 is not a difference, that's just 4.5, done, same area. However, sometimes you get people scoring a 1 and another stakeholder scores a 5 for the same factor, for the same item. That's strange. Suppose we have complexity. Risk item 1, we score a 5. Oh my God. Thought I was gone. score a 5, and someone else scores a 1. Now we start in and say, please, tell us about why you scored a 5. And he starts talking about the requirement, user story. And usually, in sentence 2 already, the other person says, but you're wrong, that's not what it does. So usually the 5 and the 1 come from different understanding of the user stories and the requirements. So we're already finding usually defects in the requirements in the consensus meeting. And once we have some kind of consensus, we position the risk items in a product risk matrix, which will come back several times in the presentation hereafter. What it means is we have a number of factors. This is a very simplified example. In this case, 2 items. Likelihood, you can have a total score. You can have a total score on impact in this case. And you will move to a product risk matrix. Now, I'm not going to explain all the scoring, how it works. That's for the one-day workshop. Next year, perhaps. But what you see is 4 squares. Impact, likelihood. And I've put it very simple in the range from low, medium, high. So you will have risk items, requirements, user stories, that will be, I cannot sleep, high impact, and high likelihood. So they'll end up in square 2. Very important. I want to focus my testing there. You will have squares or items that have high likelihood, but less important. Square 1. Okay? And also 3 and 4. So basically what you're doing is you are splitting up your test items, risk items, into 4 groups. 4 groups that will be approached and tested differently. That's another thing we come back to later. And if you approach this in a way, I would say for the whole project, you could even say, well, if you are unit testing, also in Agile, that's developers' stuff, if you want, supported by testers nowadays, but still, technical stuff. Probably, that would be something that could focus on the likelihood of things. Because I have no understanding what the business value is and how business tests are made, that's for someone else, right? But they can find the defects. They understand complexity, interfacing, all these things. And those doing acceptance testing could focus more on the impact side of things. And also already seeing, hopefully you're seeing, that the 2 test levels are now all of a sudden becoming complementary. The one is focusing on likelihood X, and the other one is focusing on impact X. Wow, that's great. Complementary testing, smart testing. Because we have scarce resources, remember? And of course, on some areas we have overlaps, but that's totally okay because that's where it really matters. And yes, we'll do some testing in square 3, don't worry. But different. I'll give some examples of how that actually works out. And the next step is, which I'll discuss later, is of course, but what does it mean for us? What does it mean if something is in square 2? That probably means we make so many test cases and we have a very thorough method. And now we're happy because we're doing orthogonal arrays, whatever. And in square 3, it may be that we're saying, well, we'll do some error guessing and see if we can find some defects, and if not, we're okay with that as well. Okay. That was, say, part 2. Okay? You're halfway there. Part 1 was, what's risk-based testing? What are we talking about? And part 2 is about how can we do that? And I gave you a very, very quick overview of how it can be done in a more traditional way, if you want. Now, we've learned that working with the Excel sheets, with stakeholder analysis, it may be, I'm saying maybe, or can be too much for some Agile projects. Depends. Sometimes you have sprints of 1 week, sometimes 4 weeks. That also makes a difference, of course. Let's assume it's too much. It's a little bit, well. So we need to be smart, more efficient if you want, but we still want to do a good risk analysis. So we have come up with something which we call risk poker. Sounds nice, doesn't it? You already had planning poker, so risk poker, lots of risking. It's basically very much based on planning poker, as you'll see in a minute. By the way, who knows about planning poker? You are allowed to raise your hand, right? Not like this. Okay. So some, not too many. Okay, it's also based on wideband Delphi, if that makes any sense to you. I'll explain those two terms in a minute, because also poker planning isn't new. It's wideband Delphi based, and we're going to play a card game. And unfortunately, it's only a keynote, but usually when I do a full workshop, we actually play the card game. It's fun. Okay. First I'm going to explain the basis, which is the foundation, wideband Delphi poker planning. And again, 2 slides only, or 1 slide, 2 slides I think. The idea is, of these methods, is that people have different views. These are, by the way, estimation techniques, not risk analysis, estimation techniques. Different views. However, these views, having different views is okay, because you can learn from one another, right? If someone says, this needs to be very complex because of that reason, that's good, because someone may not know that. So we anticipate variances. We have a mechanism to handle these variances. And also, if you have it's also a part of this whole process, if you get people involved in the estimation process, bottom up again, then of course it also raises their commitment. And the same applies to risk-based testing. If you sit in a meeting and the result is a product risk matrix all together and say, is this correct? Are the risk items in all the correct squares? And they will say, yes, there's commitment for the whole matrix. This is how we're going to approach it. It's not something that the test manager made and says, this is my approach. And someone says, it doesn't matter, but who cares? No, it's a team-based thing. In poker planning, we have cards. You can see the cards up there. Usually it's size related, story points related sometimes, depends a little bit. Each estimator has these cards. They explain the user story, requirement, backlog item if you want, and then we play the cards. Is it a big one, is it a small one? We say just play, and we all throw a cards. And those who had the highest score will explain their score. Low score will explain their score. You're allowed to change. There's some rules for each consensus. And all of a sudden, by magic, we have a sort of outcome. Okay? So very briefly, in a procedure, the moderator, could be the Scrum Master, will explain a user story. Then, those involved in the poker planning, so in estimating, will play their card. Is it big, is it small, whatever. We look at them. If we are also already in line, perfect. If not, we start discussion. Usually the highest one talks and the lowest one. And then we have a little discussion. If we agree, afterwards it's okay. If not, we try again. But we have to solve each user story within a certain time frame. It sounds very simple. It is very simple, but it works, I can tell you. Now, what does it mean for testing? Because this was not about poker planning, it's about risk-based testing. Risk poker is to some extent the same as planning poker, but a few differences. First of all, we don't say we will score the risks. No, we'll score the risk separately for likelihood. Okay, that's important. Unit testing focus, remember? And impact. So we do it twice for every user story. That's one. Second, the discussion we're having will not be like, I think this is important. Or I think this is, no, it will be factor-based. That's a rule. You got to train people in that. So when someone says, I think it's a lot higher likelihood, he has to explain it in terms of complexity, new development, interfacing, all these things we talked about. And if someone says, it's a higher impact, that's okay, but please, why? External visibility, frequency of use, financial damage, safety damage, all these things. So you got to train people in doing it that way, instead of saying, well, I think it's important. So basically, we're reusing the essentials of the, you might say, traditional method. You can only play each card so many times. Why is that? Remember, they shall make choices. Otherwise, you play a high card all the time. It's important, it's important, it's important. No. You can only play the high card so many times, as agreed. Again, there will be rules for agreement, but usually, if we don't get agreement, the product owner, that's his role, will decide on impact, and a lead developer on likelihood. Now we have all these cards in poker planning, but it's a few too many for us. It's more simpler. So we'll have only 5 cards left. Remember, 5 cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there are decks available that have colors. Colors are easy to understand. So red means I worry, I don't sleep very well. I have orange, yellow, I think green, and blue for 1. So basically the scale from 1 to 5 if you want, whatever you prefer. And 2 cards are still also applicable still. The question mark, meaning I have no clue about this one. It's better if you say I don't know, then play a card. And if you think I need a break, you have a coffee card. That's also still allowed, right? An example? It's a user story. As a bank account holder, I want a yearly financial overview of my accounts so that I can submit my taxes. Okay, that's a user story. And usually there's some conversation with that, there's some acceptance criteria, so it's explained to the team. And now the question is, what's the impact, what's the likelihood? Basically, how important is to test this one? So all given cards, let's start on impact. Ooh, and everyone just thinks. And if you want to explain, please think in terms of, you know. And I play the cards. Oh, there they are. We then start a discussion. Someone has a high score. Please explain your high score. In terms of, in this case, external visibility or all these things. Low score is explained. Now, apparently this person wants to change his card after the discussion. And the product owner says, well, we have 4 red risks. I really think this is the one we go for, so we choose for red. Okay, same user story. We only know it's impact high. What about likelihood? Cards, please. Very simplified example, but here we all disagree it's yellow. Okay, so it's somewhere in between. We do this for all the user stories, and there we are again, with a product risk matrix. That comes back all the time. It's very visual, it's very easy to understand, so we have scale 1, 2, 3, 4. In this case a little bit more colorful, depending on what you like. And every user story is positioned in the risk matrix. And of course, we'll test those in square 2 different than those in 1. Okay, remember? Now there's a debate, and I'm going to go into detail on this. There's a debate where you should have 5 colors or 6 colors. If you have 5 colors, you have a lot of many people things ending up on the X's. You say that already? A yellow one is on the X. That means at the end you have a sort of validation session saying, where does it actually belong? And the 6 colors, that's already more or less decided. I'm not going into details of this discussion because it's a long discussion and I don't know the one answer. Just making you aware of the discussion going on. Okay, Just want to see how I'm doing on time. No idea. Yeah, quite good, quite good. I'm happy. So remember, we again came up with 4 squares for the next 4 weeks or whatever. And now the next step is, what does it mean if you're in square 2? How much testing will we do? And typically I come across organizations say, well, okay, if you're doing a very square 2 important user story, you need to choose for very strong and thorough test design techniques. And if you are in square 3, we have less thorough test design techniques, whatever that means, by the way. And to me, that's a bit of there is more choices than just varying my test design technique. And I'll give you some examples again. For instance, it says there, test design startup meetings. Sometimes, I don't know if you're familiar with the context, it helps if you are starting to make test cases to have a short meeting with your stakeholders, a developer, a user, and say, what can be tested here? To get some test ideas already up front. It makes testing a lot more effective, usually also efficient. Keeps you focused already. But of course, test design type meetings take time, right? So probably it was the idea to say, well, for those items that are really important, we'll do test design up meetings, and for others we will not. Hey, you're differentiating already. Another one. Retesting. There's different ways of doing retesting. You find a defect, it's solved, you just do the same step again, if possible, and if it is good, then you're happy. That's retesting. However, you could also say, if I find a defect in a very important area of the system, right, I will not just retest the defect, I will run the whole test procedure again. It's also retesting. It costs more time, but apparently that area is so important, I want assurance that everything around is also still working. And there are all kinds of other ideas on this slide. So basically what I'm saying is, the next step is to define, based on these 4 squares, what does it mean is important? And a very simplified example, it's not very complete, but still, it comes from there they are. A company called Assembleon, and they're making these machines which are on top, called pick and place machines, very complex. They're doing agile software development. And what they're saying in one of their projects, anything that ends up in square 2 will be tested using test design techniques. Whatever one you use, we'll use formal test designs. Okay? We will always review the design. Not the test design, the design, software design if you want. As testers. As testers, we will support developing module testing. And we will review the module test. That will be done, and everything which is in that square. Square 1, we will still have a strong focus on module testing, because you remember, unit testing is important there. So still they will support module tests and review module tests. However, they will not apply full test designs, they will do some exploratory testing. Now, we have a discussion whether that's stronger or not. That's a different discussion. This is their view of this, how they did it. Square 4, they will still apply or will apply test design techniques and will review designs, and their focus on module testing is less. It's more acceptance testing driven. Okay? So different. And anything in square 3 is exploratory testing. As an example of how they're applying it, the 4 squares. how they're trying to be effective, find the defects, yet efficient. And this leads to the following slide, which I think is a very strong Agile practice. Is some people say in Agile, you don't do test planning anymore. No, that's sure correct. You don't apply IEEE 829 and write a 40-page test plan. By the way, I think you never should, but that's not a discussion. So, but test planning is about upfront thinking. What is important? What is less important? How will you approach the problem? That's what test planning is about. And many people in Agile produce what I call a so-called one-page test plan. You're probably seeing the risk matrix again. This is the output from a tool. So we have these user stories, requirements. Some are important, some are less important, right? The 4 squares. Then we have an approach. So how will we test square 2? What will we do in test squares 3, 1, 4? Probably includes the definition of done, exit criteria if you want. And that's it. And this can be printed on an A3 page, put somewhere near a task board, and we all know how we'll focus testing for the next 4 weeks. This is a result, typically, of a 1-2 hour session, where we play the card game, and we end up with something like this. That's added value. That's focus. At least that's why I think it's focus. Now, I already said in the beginning, it's if you think about testing and risk-based testing, remember, there's 4 steps. Identification, talked about it. Analysis, discussed it, talked about it. Mitigation, the approach, we talked about it. So how will we test, basically? Different term, a differentiated risk-based test approach. Wow. And the last one is monitor and report. Now in Agile, we typically don't produce big test reports. Again, you could have the question whether you should in other projects, but that's another issue again. What we want is to use something that is very simple for all the stakeholders to understand. Where are we in testing? Right? And what you see here again is that many people and many testers tend to talk in technical language. I've seen people doing this, and they go with a great test plan, and everyone understands, everyone is like, wow, and then they go testing, and they take off, and then they come back with all kind of defect reports. But nobody understands what they're doing. And also defect reports tend to be very negative, right? This is not correct, this is not correct, That's not a right, nice way to promote testing. So, using the risk matrix again, there is an alternative. Let's assume this is your result of risk matrix. This case, by the way, with 6 different colors, as you can see. So here they use the 6 factors or scoring mechanism. We have 4 user stories. After a while of testing, that changes. So apparently, number 2 is tested, no defects. So basically, we have a benefit already. Number 31 in square 4 is tested, but we had some major defects found. Okay. This one is supposed to be yellow, orange. You know, it's a bit of a strange orange with this, but it's orange. It's tested. However, we found some minor defects. And you can define it the way you like, of course. And the one which is gray, which is a square 1, is not yet being tested. This is very simple. You have an overview. where you can actually see where are we today in testing. It's positive, it's business language, it fits into Agile, we're using the initial information, reporting. So basically what you're doing is risk-based reporting if you want. May sound like a big term for something simple, but keep it simple if it works. So what we talked about for the last hour, about risk-based testing. I started by talking about to you what risk-based testing in general, what it is, risk-based testing, and don't make it too difficult. We then talked about how we can do it in a traditional environment. Briefly, okay, I agree. I then moved to Agile, playing the card game. Remember? The factors, they shall make choices. So we can actually bring a few of these more traditional values, if you want, they're important, very easily to the Agile world. I'm very much a fan, me personally, of the result being a one-page test plan. There is still a test plan, there's still focus. This is how we're going to approach it. But it's not IEEE 829 based, I'm sorry. But it has value. And even more important, you can use the same approach for reporting and tracking progress. You can even turn it into burn down charts if you want, things like that. There are all kinds of things you can probably see from there already. Depends how you will and do it. So yes, there is something available. It's worked in a traditional environment, it's worked in an Agile environment. Use it in an Agile way, perfect, but Agile doesn't mean being sloppy. Agile still means work in a structured way. So use, if you want, the formal rules. The rules like they shall make choices. The rules like if you have a discussion, it shall be objective, factor-based, things like that. Then it can actually be done in an hour. It adds value to efficiency, effectiveness, and people like it in this way. It's fun. We even did a little survey to people doing it and say, well, on a scale from 1 to 10, I know it's not a scientific survey, but it gives you some feedback. Does it help you in finding defects? Is it effective? And the result on effectiveness was an 8, so it's pretty high. People are saying we're not finding more defects, but we're finding defects that have more value, that are more important. And efficiency, again, we got a score, I think, of 7.4, which is a pretty high score. It's efficient. We're not wasting resources. We have a focus as a team. It's an Agile team. Do not stop once you've got your product risk matrix. The product risk matrix is a beginning, not an end. So define, and now comes a difficult word, words, risk-based differentiated test approach. Wow. What does it mean if something is square 2? What does it mean if something is square 3, 4, 1? Of course, you can vary using test design techniques, but I gave you a slide already. There are other ways of varying. You saw the example from Assembly as well, how they were doing it. You have to learn how you can vary, I must say. And finally, I would say use the same way. People tend to like it. It becomes a habit, but use it also for progress tracking, product quality tracking if you want, and reporting. In case you liked it, one never knows. Here is some additional material. There are some downloads, full paper on this and things like that. It's all free. There's even a tool available. Email address, it's free. So I'm not making any money here. Just don't get me wrong. There's even an opportunity to get more information. As Thomas already said, I'll be available all day. So if you have one thing to talk about, please feel free to come, talk with me, discuss. Happy to share experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. This is great. Still have some time for questions. Okay.
Just a practical question.
Practical question, okay.
Because the results of risk poker should influence the number of story points that should be assigned to different user stories, which means what are the practical experiences of in which order you should run risk poker and then the ordinary story points estimating poker or the other one?
Planning poker, yeah. Experiences, as far as the question, if I get it right, is just that risk poker can again influence the estimation of planning poker. Correct. Yes. We didn't get to it, but usually I think typically the results of risk-based testing or risk poker will influence also the development approach. It's even worse than that. Typically what you see is that people do first planning poker, and with the same team they will then do risk poker, but at the end there is a sort of validation step and say, okay, this is the result, is it correct? But it may want you to go back to the planning poker result as well and look at it again. You're correct, yes. So it's planning poker, risk poker usually, but that they have a relationship. Correct, thank you.
Hello, good morning everyone. My name is Hustef from Nokia Siemens Networks. I would have, let's say, one question as a start. How you can scale this up for a product that is, let's say, 20 years old, having 16 releases already, and like 1,000, 2,000 requirements in each release? How you can do the whole risk assessment, risk analysis?
I'm just thinking of how to answer this one, because first of all, I don't know your situation, because you say it's big, that's basically what you're saying. We've done this, as an example, at Philips Healthcare Medical Systems, when they are developing a new X-ray machine. And in this case, there were, I would say, binders full of requirements. What they did is, and I'm just going to say what they did, and then it may help you in getting the answer, but it's not a straightforward one. They had a sort of master, like a master test plan, but a master risk analysis on a very high level. So on a module level, you might say, a component level. They did risk-based testing, again, assessments within different teams, because we're talking here in this case on, I think a test team itself was about 100 persons. So there's a huge, there's a huge team. They also had a separate risk analysis for regression testing. So what you typically have is you get into a higher, lower hierarchy of risk assessments and also of matrices. Many, so there's multiple of those. You cannot cover that with one simple risk assessment, say, oh, now I know how to test. No, certainly not. And in this case, we had parts of it were developed in an agile way. So risk poker was played, if you want. And parts were done traditionally. Does that help you in an answer? So it does, yes, I did say it in a simple way here, but I recognize what you're saying, yes.
I found it very interesting, the idea to use this planning poker in risk analysis. I've seen it working in sprint planning, user story planning. But my question or my doubt, or actually, I don't know how it would work in risk analysis case, because in case of user story planning estimation, there is the team member, the participants pretty much estimate around the same points, But the risks are very different, right? Come from very different areas. Like for example, business business risk, right? So the participant on the planning, on the estimation they workshop, they may not have the ability to, or the knowledge, you know, or to be able to really estimate the correct number. So for example, there are many categories, like business, safety, and so on. And maybe on the meeting only one participant would be present who would be really able or have the knowledge to really estimate the risk precisely. So I don't know how it would work. Maybe you can give
Yeah, I can elaborate. No problem. Yes. First of all, we have only two categories. We don't have multiple. We have two categories: likelihood and impact. And safety is part of impact. So it's two categories. Yeah. Ideally, because there's a difference between ideally and practice, right? Ideally, what you typically say is that any factor is represented by at least two persons. So that means you have multiple people influencing on impact. You cannot have only the product owner being present because he understands impact, because then he will just say, this is a high risk, a low risk, that's not possible. So you need to have multiple people present. The same accounts for likelihood. Although for likelihood it's usually easier because the team consists of a lead developer, tester, who all knows. Likelihood is usually the easy part. But you need multiple people who are present, correct. And you may need, and often you need people from outside the team to participate in a risk poker to make it successful. However, I must also say I have seen risk poker being played when it's played only by the Agile team. It's a balance. On one hand, having outside stakeholders, you get more reliable results, but it costs more. It's more difficult to organize. Having only the team is easier. It's less reliable, but it's easy to organize. So I think what we're having is how important is the product? How much effort are you preparing to spend on risk analysis upfront? But you're right in saying that having only one person participating for a certain risk is a risk, if you want, yes. In traditional, going back to the Excel sheets, it's much more easier to organize, of course, because then you may ensure that every factor at least has two participants. So in Agile, you have to, again, balance. Yes?
More questions? Okay.
There's one up front. Oh, back here.
Can we get better estimation? Can we get better estimation if we use the whole team than if only a few experts do the estimation?
Okay, not really risk-based testing question, but a good question. The question is, if I get it right, is do we get better estimates if we get the whole team compared to an expert-based estimation, right? I don't have the answer in the sense that I think I've seen research and I've seen surveys. My personal experience is, I came across Wideband Delphi, which is very much a bottom-up, team-based estimation process within Philips again. Several companies within Philips. And I must say, I personally think I saw the best results on estimation where people are using Wideband Delphi. So I personally feel it's much more reliable to have a team-based estimation sessions than expert-based. My personal opinion, my personal experiences. Yes? Okay. There's another question up front.
Right, so my question is that, at least in my understanding, there are certain things, informations which are not available at the beginning of a project or a release, which might be end up in this risk planning, poker thing.
Whatever it's called, yeah.
You just don't have this information. For example, you have one factor which is like new developer. At that point, we don't know. We're not supposed to even think about who will be developing one piece of application. or at least some will say.
Mm-hmm.
So this factor cannot have an impact on that conversation, but can have an impact on the risk. So would that mean that we should come back after these information will be available for us to this risk matrix and make amendments?
Yeah.
Or what's your experience with this?
Again, there's a huge difference, I think, here in Agile and traditional. In Agile, if you only have 3 weeks, you do it once and that's it. I mean, you can't go back. Well, you can in theory, but usually we do it up front, and anything which comes up we handle by daily script meetings or whatever, but there's only one in the beginning. If we do it in more traditional projects, then usually it says somewhere, I think the last part, track the risks, it says. Then usually, if more information becomes available again, we revisit the risk matrix and the factors. And we may want to change it, but also not only you don't know about new development, but about you're now testing for the first time. The first test has been run. What are the findings? You may find more defects in areas you didn't expect it to be. So risk-based testing and risk analysis is not a one-time thing in larger projects. The same accounts if you do an Agile, then of course you build your risk matrix, but there's also a question of in the end validating how good was I initially by estimating the risks and sharing their experiences hopefully to a wider audience within your organization. I've come across many organizations that apply a weekly test scrum, whereby the testers come together, also for an hour, and share their experiences. So you can actually come back and say, hey, we did a risk analysis, risk poker, we did a 4-week sprint or whatever, and we found that this factor was actually not taken into account if we got that. So I've also seen that doing it may seem simple on a 1-hour presentation, but you got to learn, you got to tune, you got to become better at it. But it goes. That's the good thing about, I think, working in an Agile environment. Every 4 weeks, you have a chance to get better. Whereas traditional projects, it could take a year to actually have, I mean, you do risk analysis, but the actual testing would be a year later. And the world could have changed by then. Whereas in Agile, it's every 4 weeks, hey, okay, this is my initial estimation of risks, and how did it come out? And why was I wrong, or why was I right? And how can we share these experiences? Does it help answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
One more question maybe, or? Okay, I know one.
Oh. Questions?
During the risk assessment, if you have around 35 items, how can you require to assess all the risk items together? I mean, how can you ask participants to compare all the 35 risk items together? Or you just ask to go through each and every risk item, and then you can look back and correct if there are too many high level risks?
Yeah, this is a good question, by the way. How can you do it in larger numbers? Because that's basically your question. We've learned that there's a sort of maximum you can actually use. And the maximum is probably around 35 to 40 as a max. Has to do with focus, has to do with time, has to do with keeping focus, keeping people enthusiastic. So usually that means taking a few accounts together if you have larger projects. It also means that if people do, because then if you have larger numbers, then you need to do some individual preparation. Because if you just start at number 1 and say, well, number 1, and they don't look at number 40 already, oh, that's important, and you play your red card, right? Number 2, red card again, and 3, red card again, 4, red card again, 5, red card again, and you have not looked at the other wrist, it doesn't make sense. Because there may be a very important one down there. So if you have larger numbers, it usually means people have to sit down quietly, individually, to actually go through the list and make a sort of prioritization, if you want, for themselves. And where will I play which card and how will I do this? So larger numbers is complex, and as I said, I mean, it's no rule, but 35 is probably around that area is the max you can handle as a person, because otherwise you cannot compare anymore. It's like you lose overview if you want. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I know, but need to keep time.
Okay, just a short question. So
Long answer.
Answer. So do you compare the items, or do you handle them as separate? Because now you just mentioned that you are comparing them to each other.
It's all relative. Short answer. No, I'm honest. It's not about the absolute value. It's about comparing to each other. Let's take two extremes. Okay, we tested with this approach. We did it at the KVB, Dutch Soccer Association. Of course, they feel their system is very, very important. I think, who cares, right? Soccer competition only. Sorry, some. We also tested it at healthcare. You can imagine every functionality at healthcare I perceive as being more important than the soccer system, right? Nevertheless, at healthcare you get things in a very important square and also in a low important square. Why? Because we're comparing to each other. The same thing happens in the Soccer Association. At that system there are things which are very important to them. So it's very much a relative comparison. It's not about the question, is it complex? No, which one is the most complex? That's the question. It's not a question, does it have a business importance? Is it a selling item? Which one is more related as a selling item? Relative, yep, okay.
Okay, thank you very much.